Aloha, my name is Kenneth Lawson. I'm your host here on Life in the Law, and this week we're going to be talking about the criminalization of the homeless. And our guests today are Kathryn Xian, the Executive Director of the Pacific Alliance to Stop Slavery, and Beatrice Cantelmo. Did I get that right, Beatrice? Cantelmo. And she is from the Honolulu chapter of Amnesty International. Welcome. To get started, just yesterday, the mayor signed into law a couple of ordinances, at least 3 ordinances that affect the homeless population. Can you guys describe what those ordinances are and how they would affect the homeless population?
Sure. We like to call them the criminalization of homeless measures. There's one that, there's 2 that apply to Waikiki. So it's a 24-hour ban on anyone who sits or lies on the sidewalk, which the mayor and his administration have said publicly is specific to homeless persons. And there's what we call a pee and poop ordinance, which restricts anyone from defecating or urinating on any public space in Waikiki. There's also an island-wide ban on the pee and poop ordinance as well. And we feel that these bills have been improperly marketed as constitutional when inherently they are unconstitutional.
In fact, they call them like compassionate bills, almost to make you feel like, we really care about our homeless, but in fact, they do a lot of devastation.
Yeah, and there have been a lot of studies done, especially in the cities that have already passed these types of laws, and finding that they are ineffective and very costly on our criminal justice system.
And I'd like to make a comment on the compassionate aspect of
you have such a soft voice now.
These new bills, and what does it mean? Not only in terms of like how the community is going to have to absorb this impact, because there is a tax component to it, money. There's a human aspect to it, but more importantly to those who are directly impacted by. So if you're looking at these new ordinances, until yesterday, it was not illegal to be homeless or poor in Honolulu. And now it is in Waikiki district. And so what that means with these new ordinances is that a homeless person is asked to leave premises just for being homeless and being on the streets. They get cited if they don't leave. They get to go to court. If they go to court, they get fined to up to $1,000, which they can't afford to pay. They can make up to 30 days in jail, which, with a criminal record then after that, how is that going to really help someone who's homeless? How are they really addressing the issue of homelessness in this city?
Well, let me ask you this. You all have been civil rights activists for years. You've been on the forefront of this issue and many other issues, right? And so playing devil's advocate, what do you say to the people? Because I was reading some of the comments from the newspaper, whenever there was an article about the homelessness, a lot of comments are very coarse and cold-hearted, and saying, these people want to live like that. If they really didn't want to be homeless, they could go get a job. I'm tired of the homeless people being in Waikiki. They're an eyesore or whatever. What do you say to make people understand that it's not like that, to care?
I always believe that the comment section at the Star Advertiser is where compassion goes to die. The reality is that we live in a state where we have the worst regressive tax system in the nation. Our state taxes middle and low class people more than most other states in the nation. We also have the highest cost of living. The median income to be able to afford a house is $700,000. And people can't survive, and homelessness has just been building and building and building. The fastest growing population of homeless persons is actually children, families with children, and that shows no sign in stopping. If you look at the public housing situation, well, we've got a waiting list that's 12,000 people long, with no plans to actually increase public housing. We don't have any really good options for increasing low-cost housing, and so people are falling into homelessness. Yes, you see some of the cases where the few, the minority who are mentally ill, extremely mentally ill at that, and or drug addicted, make the newspapers because they like to sensationalize this minority, and it's a part of a propagandist maneuver by the city administration to paint the homeless categorically as violent, as always mentally ill, as somebody that is not like you, when the exact reality is that anybody can fall into homelessness, especially if you're Hawaiian, and especially if you are just struggling to make ends meet, because the city and the state have not been providing for its people the way it should have. And there's been a shift of priorities, as we saw during this whole process of these bills being passed through the city. And that shift focuses more on the priorities of transnational big business in Waikiki. You know, not all businesses were for the criminalization of homelessness.
Right.
But these big businesses wanted a scapegoat. They wanted to be able to say, we need to do something that that gives us the empowerment to say to the rest of the world, this is our piece of property, this is our territory that we are going to make money off of, and we're going to influence local governments to do our will. And the local government here completely acquiesced to that at the expense of the civil rights of everybody in the island.
It seems like the attitude is, especially in Waikiki, look, we make all the money for you guys. You know, if it wasn't for us businesses in Waikiki, the island would be in economic devastation. Therefore, here's some things that we need you to do. Get rid of the homeless. And that's I may be totally off base, but that's the impression I get. Because was there any studies done to demonstrate whether or not these ordinances would be effective?
Actually, here in Honolulu, I don't think so. But there are two major organizations in the mainland that have been tracking, criminalization bills, against homelessness for almost 2 decades now. And it shows that it is ineffective.
Why is
It
it
doesn't
ineffective?
work for several reasons. I mean, I think there's the constitutional aspect of it. I mean, most of these bills are really unconstitutional, not only in terms of enforcement of what's being passed, but also individuals' civil and human rights, by the Constitution of the United States, and also universal constitutional human rights that are being, violated. Then you have the issue of really, we're focusing, in the wrong priority here. We're penalizing those who are already marginalized, already have been forgotten, and are entrenched in the community, as opposed to really addressing the core reasons for why homelessness is in existence, right now. This is a trend that's happening nationwide. It's happening here too. It's no different. But those who were drafting these bills and now make it into ordinance, they knew the ramifications legally, the human rights aspect of it, and the inability to enforce it as well. So even when you think about Bill 42 and Bill 45, that the consensus, for Bill 45 not being passed. So 42 was the bill that prohibits individuals to being homeless in Waikiki. So you cannot sit, you cannot lie, you cannot, just be there as a homeless person. But Bill 45 would have been for, the entire island of Oahu. And
that one was killed.
That was killed.
So if I'm a tourist, and if I'm a tourist and I'm in swimming trunks, can I sit in Waikiki?
You would be given a warning, and if you don't comply, it really is subjective to the police officer, though. A warning isn't clearly defined, so a police officer can relay that warning as quietly or as loudly as he or she would like. And there's no way it's basically your word against that officer's word if you're a homeless person. And back to your question about studies, yes, there are studies. UC Berkeley did a study in 2012 that canvassed and analyzed 19 sit-lie jurisdictions, 7 of them being within California.
When you say sit-lie, tell them, what do you mean by sit-lie jurisdictions?
Sit-lie are these types of ordinances that make it illegal for anybody to sit or lie on the sidewalk, and they're directed specifically at homeless persons to move them out of public spaces because they are, quote-unquote, what the mayor has said, an eyesore. And this Berkeley study found that these types of laws, they don't increase economic activity. And that was the main argument of these Waikiki businesses, that they're affecting their economy base, which is completely untrue if you look at the record numbers of dollars that Waikiki has made this past year and the year before. And also, they do not increase access to social services for these homeless persons. So what you see now is these criminalization laws that target the homeless, restrict them from any public space within Waikiki, and then they have two options: either go to prison or go to shelter. Many of them can get into shelter for various very good reasons, or go to now this de facto internment camp out in Sand Island, where they won't even be provided tents. So it's not a really equitable situation there.
And what studies have shown, also across the nation, is that this is not best practice. If you really want to address homelessness, you really have to provide affordable housing in conjunction with services to support the homeless people, so that they can have the resources and the skills that they need, so that they can be self-sufficient, so they can be
be incarcerated in jail and then prison, and all of that taxpayer dollars, that consideration was not accounted for in the bill. So those laws have now an unfunded mandate, which are a burden to the average taxpayer as well. And furthermore, the big unfortunate problem with this is that now money is being taken from Housing First, which is actually proven to work in ameliorating the houseless issue. But now funds are being diverted from that and going to the Sand Island de facto internment camp instead.
And I'd like to comment on the money aspect.
Let me do this. We're going to come right back with you. I'm being signaled that I have to go to a break. We got to pay the bills around here. But when we come back, we're going to talk. I also want to get back to, how does a person end up homeless? Because I think once people understand that most of us live paycheck to paycheck, and if I lose my job, right now, and the way the landlord-tenant law is set up out here, if you rent, you can be out a lot faster than in most other states on the streets. And that's how a family get up homeless, just by losing their job and not being able to afford housing. So anyway, we're going to get back with that when we come back after this break, and then we'll talk about solutions also.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on the ThinkTech digital series. The show is every Wednesday from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and I want you to watch this show because I think that when we talk with artists on the show about what they do, how they do it, and most importantly, why they do it, I believe that it resonates within each of us, and we find something inside of ourselves that brings us closer to all of humanity. That's what arts are there to do, and that's what I'm here to do on this show. That's Center Stage. It's on every Wednesday from 2 to 3 o'clock. I hope to see you there.
All right, welcome back to Life in the Law. Again, I'm your host, Kenneth Lawson, and we're talking about the criminalization of homelessness here in Hawaii with our two guests, Kathryn. And B, before we went to break, you were talking about the cost.
Yes, the hidden costs that are not on the budget, for the criminalization of homelessness here in Honolulu has a big impact on, budget for our police, EMS, fire departments, our hospitals, our jail system. Just to give an example, if somebody's sent to jail for being cited and not being able to pay their fine for now being homeless, they get to spend, not the homeless person, but the city, $420 a day to keep that person in jail.
And what happens to all the items that the person has accumulated? People think that homeless people just don't have anything, but there's certain items that are necessary that they have. What happens to those items if they get put in jail? Do you know?
They're thrown away.
Yeah.
The jails tend to throw necessities such as IDs, and everybody knows that you need an ID in order to apply for a job or apply for housing. And so it's really debilitating. On top of the existing laws that have been passed by the city that allow city officials to confiscate property from houseless persons if they're living on a public space, just is paralyzing to them. And these are local families that are just trying to save enough money to be able to get into housing or to afford, first month's rent plus deposit, and they can't get into shelter because maybe their families are too big, or one of them has a lost ID or stolen ID. And so there are a lot of mitigating factors that make it really difficult. The city hasn't made it any easier. These are people that, for instance, they don't deserve homelessness, or they don't choose homelessness, and that's a myth going on.
Right.
I've met many families that have fallen into homelessness because they became ill. One man had a heart attack and he couldn't work anymore. And he's struggling to regain his health while his wife is now working 2 jobs. They're still homeless. They have a toddler to take care of, and they're fighting, trying to make it by getting that money to be able to get back into the swing of things while avoiding these raids and keeping already what they have. I met another elderly woman who became homeless because she suffered from mental illness after years of being beaten by her husband, who then subsequently cut her off from contact with her only son. These are real stories and real people, and these are the real sources of homelessness, not what you think, what you read in the comment section of the newspaper. Oh, they deserve it because they're lazy, they don't need a hand up, they need a handout, or they want one. That's not the truth.
And I'd like to also add to that we have to also look back at affordable housing, and even families who are homeless, who are working, they are poverty level, below poverty level, that even with public assistance, they still cannot make ends meet. You still cannot afford to pay rent. And so you end up homeless. And so I think there's a huge myth, that's spread around here that people who are homeless are not doing anything, that they're not trying hard enough. So we have to look affordable housing, poverty, but also systems and services that were cut, funds that were cut to support individuals. I think with the case with individuals who are mentally ill, chronically mentally ill, and who have substance abuse issues, the state have cut a lot of funds over the years and have not replaced it, with additional services. So we have our jail systems, serving for the new place, but not really providing the services, and that's not an appropriate place to send people who really need services and help. So they're like getting, struck twice. For being ill, for needing help, and not having the services.
Well, not only that, but there's certain basic human needs that we all have. We have we have to sleep, we have to rest, and we will have to relieve ourselves of waste. And I think the reason why this criminalizes homeless because it's a basic need, it's a basic right and it makes me sleeping, resting, a crime. When you have your home to go to, you get to rest all you want to. I don't have a home. And it's involuntary. It's not like I chose. Like you said, I didn't choose not to have a home. I don't have a home. Now, the fact that I need the basic human right of sleep means I'm now being charged with a crime because of the fact that I may have to go urinate and no store will allow me to come in there to use their restroom. Where should I go?
Right. You generally do not want to create more laws that criminalize nonviolent behavior. And for the fact that, number one, it traumatizes its victims. It doesn't really get them in a place of mind or in a status position where they can grow into a valued member of society that has a job and can pay rent in this state where it makes it very difficult. But also it overloads our already overburdened criminal justice system and our prisons. And so what I see as a desperate effort of some lawmakers to tackle a very huge problem, they've unfortunately devoted too much focus on something that works the very least and is the most costly, which is the criminalization of the homeless. Because at the end of the day, what you're going to eventually see is that it's not making a dent in the homeless issue. It's just going to shuffle the chronically homeless around to different districts. Yes, many may go to prison, they'll be spit back out, and they will return
Prisons
back
are
to
crowded. I
the
mean, what
same.
judge wants to put some? Do you think if I had a choice, as crowded as a prison, and I'm a judge, I'm gonna put a homeless person in prison or this guy who just assaulted somebody? You know, I mean, come on.
But I would like to comment on the criminalization aspect of what it means for a homeless person once they go into the court
Into the
system and have, something on record. Let's look in terms of even being able to qualify for public assistance housing. So Public Housing Authority laws with HUD has very strict guidelines that will say if you do have a criminal record, or even if you are into public housing but you have a criminal record, you may not qualify for those benefits, or you may be evicted. So it is so difficult. Now let's think about work. If you go and you apply for a job and you have a criminal record against you, and your only crime is that you're homeless and poor, which employer is really going to look at that and understand, what was your offense and give you a chance? So it's really hurting people on so many different levels. It has a huge impact on people's ability to really being able to thrive.
I think also one of the tragic things is that throughout this whole campaign that the city waged and its compassionate disruption, they convinced people that the homeless were to blame for the smell of feces and urine pervasive throughout Waikiki, when in actuality, it's because of the overflowing of the sewage system that needs to be replaced because the pipes are 80 years old. And that's everything to do with the city and maintenance of basic public utilities and not the problem of the poor. And so you see the scapegoat tactic being employed. Furthermore, with the large hotel chains that actually aren't based in Hawaii but benefit economically from our state, scapegoating the most poor for the economic woes of the entire state, when in actuality it's these large mainland businesses, hotel chains, that don't pay their workers a fair wage, that move most of their profits outside of the island and outside of the state for their own profit, and they're a big part of the reason why our economy is actually sinking rather than floating and being beneficial to all. There's a very lopsided, imbalanced distribution of wealth in this island that's because of these industries. But to have them scapegoat the people who suffer from that paradigm was very surprising, audacious, and completely unjust in my eyes.
And government and city ordinances should never be passed at the expense of the people that they are supposed to protect and serve. You have to have provisions at a government level, that really meets the needs of those, who really are not being seen, and not at the expense of having big corporations and businesses lobbying and saying, you are hurting our businesses and our profits, and we don't want our tourists to have a negative experience because they're not coming back. What message are we really passing, as a Hawaiian city, as part of this state? What part of aloha spirit, really criminalizes and de-enfranchises the most vulnerable of our citizens?
And it speaks to our character. Because really what it's saying is we don't care about you. Right? I mean, I don't care how you slice it. That's what the message that I get is we don't care about you. You're not important. And I think the sad thing is the stories that you told about some of the people you met, those people that you met who aren't volunteering to be homeless. Do you know how much, I can't imagine how much pressure would be on a family to lose their housing and have to try to find a job or work because they can't afford their housing and raise a family homeless. Come on.
Imagine how much harder it is for someone who's dealing with all of these adversities, and then they have to, be ready, clean, make to work on time, use public transportation, get their kids to school,
But also they're subject to regular raids where
yes.
all of their stuff will be confiscated.
You don't know where you're going to be, if you're going to have your things. Your kids don't know. I think one of the most disheartening experiences I've had with one of the city, the homeless raids, that I accompanied you, was hanging out with the kids. And, we were on the sidewalk. There were about 4 of us. The kids were less than 5 years old. And we had about 15 police squad cars circling, the park. And the kids were like, why are they here? Why some people have homes and we don't have? What is going on? Am I going to be separated from my mom and my dad? Where am I going to be? And I honestly did not know what to tell them without further traumatizing, their lives and the experiences that they're already having at that moment. So it is really hard when people don't understand the impact that these ordinances, have on people's lives and families' lives.
What's odd is back in 1929 in our country when the stock market crashed, right? And I was watching a movie the other night called Cinderella Man, right? This heavyweight boxer, that he lost everything and so the government helped those people. A lot of them became homeless, but they're not viewed as bums. They're not viewed as people the scourge of the earth. But all of them were just as homeless as the people that we're talking about now, and for the same reasons that many of the homeless are here now, because of economics, right? But they're not viewed in the same light back then, even though they were in the same position as people that are homeless now. It's almost, they're viewed in the light where, these people are heroes. They've struggled and all that, but what's not being shared is all the government help that was needed to put these people back on their feet, all the government programs that had to be established to get these people housing, all the government programs that had to be established to get them food and basic needs covered, right?
Yeah, well,
we forget that.
Way back then, I mean, there were a fair amount of criminalization efforts by the government under President Hoover that made it really most difficult for the poor back then to get back on their feet. It wasn't until FDR took office with the New Deal where things started to change, but there were Hoovervilles or shanty towns just filled with homeless persons, a lot of them veterans that came home from the war that weren't getting paid for their benefits for actually serving, that were just littered around the Capitol. It wasn't, again, until FDR and those real challenges and policies that actually were for the people, like Social Security, social programs, housing programs, that's where they all came about. And now we've become a little bit more removed from that history, and definitely our political leaders have forgotten that history and are recreating the same mistakes to the detriment of both of our economy and the welfare of our people.
Yeah.
And I think also that, Honolulu has an invitation to look at the collective wisdom of history, of other states that underwent the same criminalization laws, what they've learned about the cost, the mistakes, the human cost that it's immeasurable. When you think about how these bills are going to impact individuals and families and children, not just now, but for generations to come, and their potential, to be free, to be productive, to have choices, and for us to have a really thriving community. I think it's a really sad day when, what it seems like what we're suffering here is compassionate fatigue syndrome. I think people are so desensitized by the issues of poverty and how governments work or should work, and it's not working. There's an issue of accountability. There's an issue of morals and ethics. They're really not being taken into account, and they should, as people are drafting laws and are trying to make it into effect. They have to listen to the advocacy and the concerned citizens and the people who are directly impacted in these ordinances, to see, is there any validity to what they're saying? Are there any studies done that contradicts, what we're about to pass? And this is where I think, there is a conflict here, is that these informations, were available, they were thoroughly discussed, they were not heard. Those bills were passed regardless.
All right. Well, we're going to come back and talk about solutions in our last segment. But we're here on Life in the Law. Again, I'm your host, Ken Lawson. and we're talking about the decriminalization of the homelessness here in Hawaii. We're going to get back with what are the solutions? If this is wrong, the way that these ordinances have been passed, then how do we resolve this? And what solutions do we have to offer to our state? See you in a minute.
Aloha, welcome to ThinkTech Hawaii. My name is Josh Green. I'm the host of a program called Healthcare in Hawaii. I'm a physician. I work in the emergency department on the Big Island. I also serve in the state senate, which, please don't hold that against me, doesn't detract from my television program. We speak about all the big healthcare issues in the state. We get together on Tuesdays from 2 o'clock till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we try to talk about the most important issues in healthcare. This is a terrific venue for people to learn about healthcare. There are many programs on this station. We broadcast it later, not just on the internet, but also on OC16. Thanks for joining us. Please be informed healthcare consumers.
All right, I'm Kenneth Lawson, again, your host of Life in the Law, and we are here talking about criminalization of homelessness here in Hawaii. Laws took effect yesterday, which now makes it a crime in Hawaii to be homeless and try to exercise your right to certain basic human needs, sleep, and to be able to relieve yourself without going to jail or being fined up to $1,000. What are the solutions? I mean, one thing I looked at, you sent me the report about Berkeley earlier today, and you sent me another study also, B. And at least in Berkeley, what they did before they passed the ordinance, was they did a study. They had Berkeley do a study to determine, is this going to work, right? And it came back, really, you guys, it's not going to work. And it was based on looking at other similar statutes and ordinances that had been acted in other cities. Was that done here?
No, it wasn't. And, a lot of the pushback and the reaction that we have been hearing from the general public, not all of the public, of course, but a vocal minority, is that, well, you guys don't have any alternatives, you don't have any solutions, which is completely untrue. I don't know where they got that assumption. There are proven solutions that have been working for a couple of decades now that we've actually also informed the city about, which they know about, which is Housing First being the basic one that covers the services for the chronically homeless, which is those people in Waikiki that the Waikiki industry is most concerned about, because they're the most visibly homeless, they tend to be extremely mentally ill, and they're a very small minority of the population overall. But Housing First has proven to work time and again with the chronically homeless. And the sad thing is that these laws, in conjunction with the proposal to house these chronically homeless in Sand Island, is a sap on resources, taking away from fully implementing Housing First. And the sad thing about that is that it really paints a picture of how ineffective our city government is on focusing on a real hardcore viable plan to lift people out of homelessness. And what they're really focused on is development and tourism at all costs.
Right.
And hiding the issue of homelessness.
Exactly.
And so, out of sight, out of mind. What Sand Island Encampment does, really, it is not a program that will address homelessness in the short term or long term in an effective way. That's not their purpose, really. And if you look at the models, that have been tested and proven to work, with Housing First, for example, you have transitional housing, but with the idea to get you into permanent housing.
Right.
You have wraparound services, which what it means is that it is an individualized, tailored case-made plan, to really meet the individual unique needs of that person who's homeless or their family. So they will look at it, very integratively. They will look at education, they will look at their mental health issues, they will look at what needs that they have and what support systems do they need to have in place to really empower them. It's strength-based kind of approach. It is not the one that is punitive, that will exclude you. Even in the case of Sand Island, most of the people who are on the streets would not make it there because they have a criminal record. If they have disturbance issues or if they have issues with mental health that is really not under control, they won't be able to be there. So what message are we sending? That not only we are creating bills that criminalizes homelessness, but even the most of the most vulnerable don't even fit in the place that you want to send and forget them there.
And the sad thing is that to try to educate a population that already thinks they know what the homelessness issue is about, that these are just people who voluntarily be there. I mean, how do you tell the average voter you've been bamboozled, you've been hoodwinked, really, because that's what's happened here. You really think that what's going to happen is going to solve our problems, but it's going to cost you more money in the long run because we didn't do a study as responsible elected officials. You would think that before we enact a law that affects human lives, that we do a study to see is this the most cost-effective way to be done. That wasn't done here. But yet each time I see an election, I see these guys with their signs and they waving as I drive by, elect me. That's not responsible leadership in my estimation, right? Responsible leadership says what is, it's done like what Berkeley did, do a study. Is this going to be effective? Because why do it if it's not going to be effective?
And if you're not doing studies, but you're basing your ordinances, on states that already went through this and has been proven that it is unconstitutional and it doesn't work, please pay attention and listen to the wisdom, and the collective learning experiences of these places and the people who had to suffer and all of the wasted money and resources, that could truly address the issues and really impact people in the community in a positive way. And apply it here. Don't repeat the same mistakes.
I think in my assessment of our city officials and the city council and our mayor is that they don't care about the democratic process. We saw that clearly throughout hours and hours of testimonies opposing the laws that he just signed. And time will tell. People, I believe that the majority of people you cannot fool. They will notice that the homeless situation is not ameliorated by these criminalization laws. They will look for answers. They will hold people accountable, our leaders. And then our leaders will have to be hard-pressed to come up with excuses in 2016 by the next election on why their policies didn't work and where all the taxpayer dollars went.
Another cost is going to be a class action suit that the city's going to have to defend, because I don't see how you can enforce this without being selective.
Right. There's major selective enforcement going on, and our police force is already challenged with ethics questions. You don't want to give them more power to selectively enforce these criminalization laws that have the potential to put innocent people who are nonviolent into prison. It gives them overbridled power and authority that just opens the door for constitutional violations in practice. The Berkeley study stated that the Ninth Circuit Court said that even though these types of laws are constitutional as written,
on their face,
yes, in practice, as applied, they are unconstitutional and therefore open to constitutional challenges in a court of law, which will cost, again, the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars, which the city and our mayor seem to be very willing to go into ththese court decisions, just so long as they can pass their laws in the meantime.
But the laws were passed very specifically for a segment, an area in this city, Waikiki. When Bill 45 did not pass, the argument for not having it passed was the one for the entire Oahu city. That you do not, the city-like, provisions, to the ordinances, for the entire city. It did not pass because, even amongst the councilors, they were able to recognize that it was unconstitutional, that it could not be enforced, and that it would open, huge margins for interpretation and also liability and legal issues.
But even though they voted against it, it was a very close call.
Yeah, 5-4.
5-4, it was voted down.
So even that.
What about that thing you understand?
Yes.
4 people.
But at least that.
But they're all unconstitutional
Yes.
in my book, and in most people's book for that matter too. And that's the scary thing. It tells you a lot about the way our government is shifting.
And what's really behind the drafting and the delivering of these ordinances, and who is really at mind. I think one of the things I appreciate about these opportunities is that we really need to be more transparent in terms of educating our community about what's really at stake.
Yeah.
What does this really mean? We use a lot of jargons, we use a lot of terms, but we don't have an opportunity to have them defined. We don't have an opportunity to give people a chance to really process, what's really going on, so that they can also, make their own opinions, but with more information, with more knowledge. We don't have that right now. Like for Kathryn and I, we go, to these hearings, we hear the process, we're doing the research. I have spent countless hours trying to even catch up with, like, what's really going on here?
That's the problem with the press too. When you only have one, you got civil people, but you need at least a selection to where the information is getting out through the press. So if I don't have time to go to a hearing, at least I can see fair reporting, or see both sides of it, as opposed to just one side. We're running out of time here, but I would just say this. It bothers me to say, okay, I live in a place that's recognized to be paradise, but we don't care about each other to the extent to where I can claim I live in paradise, but treat my fellow person, my fellow sister, my fellow brother, as if they're not human. And there's something wrong with that. And that is something we have to work on. But again, I thank you both for not just for coming on the show, but for all the tireless work you do in your individual fields on behalf of civil rights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Until next week, again, I have absolutely no idea what our show next week is going to be about. None. But we're going to have different music next week, right? More uplifting music to empower you to change the law in your area. Till then, we'll see you.